Hey friends, it's Simon Hurley and welcome to another video here on the Gel Press YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be using some of the gel presses along with embossing folders to get some really amazing prints with tons of color and texture on your card making projects. So without further ado, let's get into it. This is a really great tip. Sometimes instead of using a full gel press to cover, I actually love using the little 3x5 inch rectangle and the 4-inch round circle. These are going to create some really fun backgrounds that you can move off to the side on a card or kind of ground with a shape like this circle. I think it's super fun to play with different shapes rather than just doing a whole background. Alright, so for the first one here, I'm going to use the 3x5 rectangle. I'm going to pull it out of its package. And when I work with the gel press, I like to just take off one of the plastic sheets. You can take off both if you'd like, but this makes it so that I can kind of move it around on my surface and not have to worry about it sticking to anything or damaging the backside. Alright, then I'm going to bring in my paints. I love these Dina Wakley Media acrylic paints. The main reason why I use these is because they're a heavy body paint. And I find that some other paints, if they're a little bit too liquidy, will kind of bead up on the surface. So I like that these just kind of hold their ground and will hold an image nicely, but you can use whatever kind of paint or medium you'd like. I did test inks for today's technique, and unfortunately it didn't hold the image well enough like a paint does, so I'd recommend using something a little bit thicker like this. So I'll put down my colors, and then I'm gonna grab a Brayer. This one is really awesome because it's got a nice large surface on it, which I really liked for this because I'm able to just Brayer the whole thing at once then. It's just super cool, so I'm just going to start Brayering back and forth. Start rolling it on my surface. And a little bit of that paint goes a long way. You don't need a ton of paint on here. Once that's all Brayered out, I'm going to grab my embossing folder, and today I'm using the Scalloped Flowers 3D embossing folder from Altenew. And you could use either side here. They're both going to give different results, which is what I love about embossing folders. But I'm going to use the raised side, where the flowers are kind of raised. So I'm going to just take this and press it into my gel press. And we can give some good pressure here and press it down all over the place. You want it to kind of sink into all those different grooves and capture all the amazing texture that this has. All right, so once that's complete, we have two different backgrounds that we're gonna get from this. One, we're going to just pick up as a print, and I like to take it and stamp it down like a stamp, because then we can kind of plan where we want it to go, but you can do it just straight down to your desk like we had it. But this way I can kind of see how it's turning out, which I love. Maybe it's just because I come from using a lot of stamps. So then we're going to peel this off, and there we have one of our amazing backgrounds, right? You can see all that awesome texture and detail in there. But then the second version that we can get, and I'm just going to kind of spray this down just a little bit to make sure that it's still wet. I'm just going to place it down in here. Hold this down, make sure that it doesn't move at all when I'm closing it. I'm gonna grab my die cutting machine, place it in there, and still kind of holding it down to make sure that things don't move around. We'll place it in with one of the plates, but you can check your die cutting machine for how to use the embossing folder inside, and we'll run it right through. All right, so once we pull it out here, you'll see that really awesome background that you get. I love all the amazing kind of watercolor on there. It gives you a really cool look, and it's of course gonna be different every time, which I love. And this is the debossed side, so we're getting a bunch of texture there. So this is the embossed side, and depending on what side you're going to use, the side we use pressed down into it like this, which I think is super cool. Now with the embossing folder, since we used paint, I just want to go in right away before that all dries and make sure to clean it off nicely so that that won't transfer and we won't have any globs of paint in there on any other projects. Now I'm going to go in and show you how to step up this kind of background. So I'm going to take my embossing folder once again, and this is the side that we used to kind of press in to get that design, but we used the mirrored image since it stamps down. So we'll go to the opposite side now and kind of hold it up to here to get it to line up. We just want to match up the image, almost like a little puzzle here. All right, so once I've lined it all up, I can then close it down onto, and there you can see it lined up really nicely. And then we'll put it through my embossing machine, once again, making sure that it doesn't move as we run it through. All right, so once we pull this out, we're gonna get a different look This time it's going to be raised off the surface, which I think is super cool. So two totally different effects, right? We get this more kind of letterpressed look with that debossing, and then we get kind of that raised look with the embossing. So two totally different effects with one pass through the gel press. All right, I'm gonna use this background on the card, and I'm just gonna go in with my larger Tim Holtz shears here so I can cut this out really quickly. I'm just cutting right outside the gel press line, and I'll just adhere it to the card. And this is why I said I like these kind of like different shapes from the gel press, because I wanted to adhere it to one side here, and we'll make the sentiment kind of overlap. And it just adds a little bit more interest instead of it being the whole card front. For my sentiment, I'm just going to do a layered die cut. So I've grabbed a little hello die from Scalloped.com, and I'm gonna run it through my die cutting machine with some black cardstock about 3 times so I can layer it up. And then to line things up, I take the next die cut and kind of place it down very loosely there. And so that it's all lined up, I just kind of take everything and give it a tiny little touch, like almost like I'm pinching it together super lightly on every kind of corner or edge. Like here on the L's, I'll pinch it together. And this just ensures that every letter is gonna line up perfectly, since we're kind of pinching the sides rather than just trying to eyeball it and place it down. I find that this really helps to get things lined up. When it comes to adding a little bit of extra special to die cuts, I like to take a little bit of Versamark ink at the end here, and I'll just kind of smoosh it onto my die cut there so we get lots of clear sticky ink on the surface. And then I'll go in with a little bit of clear heat embossing powder, and I'll just throw a little bit of that over top to give it a nice clear coat. And then I can go in with my heat tool and heat set this. And you just want to heat set it until it turns clear and shiny. All right, one layer gives a little bit of shine, but I like to go in with at least 2 or 3 layers for kind of the optimal glossy effect. And you could do this with whatever color embossing powder you have. If you want to do gold, it creates this really cool metallic effect. So then again, I'll sprinkle over top the embossing powder. So here is that finished card. I love the shine of the sentiment from all those layers, and I finished it off with just a few sparkly clear gems. So I love that this effect was just created with an embossing folder and the gel press to get all that color and the amazing texture that we got from it as well. Super cool. All right, let's move on to the next card. So here I'm going to use the 4-inch round plate. We'll pull this one out. And exactly the same thing as the other one, I'm going to just peel off one of the plastic sheets and keep the other one on as we work. All right, so for this card, I'm gonna go with some more ocean type colors. So I went with a couple of greens and blues here. And again, I'm using a pretty thin amount of paint on my plate. Once again, I tried it with way too much paint tonight, and I thought the technique wasn't gonna work, but it just turns out you need to apply less paint because then you're gonna get more of a crisp image and have less of that paint spread all over the place. These colors are just stunning. I'm going in with a little bit of ocean now, and I've wiped off my brayer in between. I just cleaned it off with a little bit of a paper towel to clean it, and you could always leave it dirty and just let the paint dry on there, but I want clean colors. So I went in, cleaned it, and then we'll go in and roll this out with our brayer. And I kind of, as I brayer, I cycle all the way through the brayer to make sure the paint is kind of moving all the way through rather than just going back and forth. You want to lift your brayer and make sure that it's going all the way through. So I'm going to go in here and take my plate. And once again, this is why I leave on the plastic, because here I'm able to press it in like a stamp, get all that amazing texture into the grooves there. This is gonna be super cool once it's done, I can already tell. So for the first print, I'm going to take this and again, use it kind of like a stamp and press it onto my cardstock. And I'm gonna do kind of a little bit off the edge there because if I were to make a card, that's how I'd want it to be. And oh, I just love that. Of course, I got a little paint on the edge there, so I would cut this out. But that is some really great texture from the embossing folder. Isn't that just so cool? Because all those different grooves will give you different effects rather than just a stencil or a stamp where it's 1D. This gives you like a 3D look, which I think is amazing. All right, enough talking. I need to do this before it gets dry. So I'm going to spray it just a few times so that the surface is nice and wet with paint. And then we'll take our cardstock and bring it in here, place it down, press it down there. All right, so once we've run that through our die cutting machine, it impressed that really awesome texture and we get that beautiful design as well on there. So it didn't transfer as well as solid of a color. It's probably because I was talking, because there's a little bit of paint still left in here. So it definitely dried a little bit, but we want to go in and clean that off before it's too late. So the cool part about these prints though is because it's embossed, so it's raised here, we can go in with our brayer and any excess paint that's still on there and paint the top of it. So give it a little bit of pressure and it'll only hit the raised areas, which is super cool. So it makes it darker on those embossed areas. So wherever it peaks there on the waves, it creates a darker effect. So just using the excess paint from your brayer is a really awesome idea on your projects. And then same thing for this one. I'm gonna go in with my shears again and go right around that circle to cut it out. And here you can always find a circle die that matches. But I find that just following the shape of the plate is pretty easy to do. To finish off the scene, I'm going to use a couple of dies from Memory Box. Here I'm using the KELP from the KELP Collage. That creates a really awesome background, but I just want these little greenery for my ocean scene. So I'll cut out a few of these. And I'm also going to use this School of Fish die. I love this one. It just cuts out a bunch of amazing little fish that you can use on your cards. And look how cool that is. You just get a bunch of amazing little textured fish that you can use in your project. All right, so I've got a tip for coloring die cuts. So to add a little bit more dimension, I'll take one of my ink pads. Here I'm using Fake Plant, and I'll just kind of dab on some of that ink to both edges to give a little bit more depth and dimension. You can see that really livened up the piece of kelp with just a little tiny bit of inking. That's all you need to do. Just give it a little bit more dimension than just a flat piece of cardstock. And I find that that really, really helps to bring everything in your card to life. And in the same manner with the fish, I'm gonna go in with my Simon Hurley Create inks again. And all I need to do, I'm literally just taking like leftover ink that's already on my blending tools. And this is starting with white cardstock, which is another thing you totally can do. And then just go in and fully shade these in. And I wanted to kind of create some really fun and colorful fish. So this was my idea, to just go in and use some of my ink pads. So here I used a little bit of Prom Queen, Bee Sting, Guppy, and then I'll bring in a little bit of Traffic Cone on this guy's tail. All right, so let's put everything together. I'm gonna start off with my little kelp pieces, and I'm just gonna create kind of a scene with them. I've already put a little bit of adhesive on the back of them, and we can just go in and create some little kelp plants at the bottom of our scene. So I'll just add a few down, and then we can take our scissors, chop them off here on the bottom, and this gives us even more little pieces to use on the opposing side. So then I'll use like the excess piece that we just cut off and throw it down there. So we can kind of keep reusing them to create little plants at the bottom. And then for the fish, I'll just add them down using a little bit of foam tape to make them kind of stand out from the rest of the scene. For the sentiment, I'm going into the Mythical Mermaid stamp set and using this Have a Fantastic Day sentiment. I really love that one, and I think it fits this card really nicely. All right, so I've added a few gems to the card, and that finishes it off really nicely. I love how this one came together with that background, that we kind of finished it off with that extra brayering on top, which makes it look super cool. And I love how it finished it off with all those amazing Memory Box products too, with that under the sea scene. Overall, I've had so much fun with the different effects and textures you can get using your embossing folders along with your gel press. If you guys enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below so you can see more videos from other talented gel press designers. Also, leave a comment down below if you guys tried this technique and what you think of it. I think it is so much fun to explore and play with all of the amazing possibilities. Alright guys, I'll see you very soon for another card making video. Have a great day. Bye!